Hi there. Welcome. I'm Christine Weber. I love supporting mature yoga teachers as they get their wisdom out there into the world so that they can feel a sense of meaning and purpose and doing really good work, and also so that they can support themselves. So today I want to talk to you about the conflict of religion and yoga. It's something that you've probably thought about, something that's probably come up for you. It's certainly come up for me plenty of times. I've been living in the South. I live in North Carolina, which is in the South. And I've lived here for about almost 25 years. And I've been teaching yoga the whole time I've been here. And I have encountered several times folks who are concerned. Usually it's a sense of like, I'm concerned that this might not be in line with my religious beliefs. But sometimes it's an accusation that I'm doing the devil's work, or that I'm a cult. I'm trying to get people into my cult. I've had that happen before to me, and that was a long time ago, and I learned how to be much more diplomatic after that unpleasant experience. But it's just not uncommon. And the other thing I want to say is that since I've been teaching online, which has been for almost 8 years, that I have had quite a few people comment over the years, and not infrequently, on either my ads or on things like this, saying that yoga is the devil's work and you need to stop doing yoga because you're going to hell if you practice yoga. So, there's a part of me that's just like, okay, see ya. There's a part of me that really easily brushes that off and doesn't care about it. But there's another part of me that's like curious, because I would really like to help folks, whatever their belief system, whatever their political beliefs. Like, I still want to help folks regulate their nervous system so they can be the best person they can be, and maybe chip away at some of the rigidity and dogma that keeps them tethered to unhelpful beliefs and values. Yeah, I don't mind being a little subversive, but that's not my intention. My intention is like, how can I help people who, regardless of what they think? So when people come to me and they say things like, I don't want to chant in Sanskrit because it might be against my belief system. I don't want to, I don't like to see images of deities in yoga studios because it might interfere with my belief system. I don't want to, think about a mantra because that comes from another belief. Like, when they say things like that, I have to be ready to respond compassionately. And that's the first thing I want to say, is that the first way to, as a yoga teacher, sometimes we get like almost offended by people. How dare you think I'm doing the devil's work? Quite the opposite. But really, the first thing is compassion and empathy, because let's remember that many people have not only been brainwashed by people purporting to represent a religious belief, right? Purporting. I say that very intentionally because all religions have beautiful aspects to them, right? All spirituality has beautiful aspects to it. And all of them tend to have a little something a little toxic too. So people purporting to represent and purporting to hold the truth have not only brainwashed people, they've also traumatized people. So people may be coming to you having been traumatized, maybe not having processed or worked through the whole thing, and then asking you for your guidance. And here you are as a yoga teacher, and all you want to do is teach some yoga, do some asanas, some meditations, and pranayama. Should be easy peasy, go home and have a nice day. But now you've got somebody who has some really deep, unprocessed wounds that have come from their families or whatever, their religious communities. So that's the first thing, is remember, like, if someone's coming to you and saying yoga is the devil's work, they are pretty traumatized people, and that trauma has confined their mind, and the dogma has confined their mind so much that they're unable to think outside of the box and accept the possibility that there may be other ways of knowing and other ways of connecting with spirit and the divine. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we can talk historically. about yoga. So yoga, especially yoga that is defined as one of the 6 darshans of the Vedic tradition, is absolutely devoid of any specific deity. And we have Purusha, which exists within each person, and also the concept of a Purushottama, Purusha. I can't remember how Patanjali explains it, but it's the concept of like an overriding sort of Purusha that connects all of us, right? But we have these individual pure consciousness, and then we have a collective pure consciousness. There's nothing religious about that. It's a very spiritual practice without religion. So that, remembering that. And then the third part is remembering that yoga traditionally, for thousands of, well, 2,000 years at least, hundreds of, let's say, for hundreds of years, has been practiced within the context of different belief systems. So you have the archetype of the Vedic priest, or the Buddhist priest, or I don't know, they would say monk. This is probably offering ceremony and chanting and offering services to the public. And then you have the archetype of the yogi doing meditation, and those are often the same people historically, right? So they might have their own practice, but then they're using the wisdom gained from that practice and working with folks on a more of a ritualistic level in different religious contexts. So there might be somebody who's like a Vedic priest, but you might also have like someone who is more associated with Krishna worship or Shiva worship or Devi worship, and they're practicing yoga under the rubric or under the umbrella of that belief system. So that's very historical. Yoga was never confined to one different religion. Hinduism, and here's another point, Hinduism is a Western construct that doesn't exist in the Vedic, it doesn't exist in India, you could say. Now, of course, people will call themselves Hindu in India, and that is a result of the 300 plus years of colonialism by the British. So it's not that, Hindu means something now, but traditionally it didn't really mean much, because India is made up of such a variety of cultures and belief systems that it's very, it's erroneous. It's not accurate to say that there is one monolith religion in India. There's just hundreds of them, if not more. So anyway, thinking about it in that terms too, or letting people know, like, India's they're not just Hindu, and it's not Hinduism over here and Christianity or Judaism over here. They're very much or Hinduism is very much a very multifaceted belief system, or different belief systems, I should say. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, why do we have to chant in Sanskrit instead of in English? Well, first of all, you don't have to chant Sanskrit, like chant English, go for it. But I do like to explain to people why Sanskrit is a useful language for chanting if they feel concerned about it. Of course, they don't have to chant. You don't have to chant at all. There's Vedic chanting, which is very much neutral, and it comes from the text like the Upanishads or the Vedas, the Rig Veda, for example. And for the most part, doesn't mention deities, like Asatoma Sadgamaya, a very common chant, or there's no deity in there. It's about lead me from the darkness to the light, lead me from ignorance to knowledge, the untruth to the truth, and lead me from death to eternal life, or feeling of being connected to all that is. So like those kinds of mantras that are in Sanskrit are not related to deities. Now, there are mantras that are related to deities, and often, but not always, they fall under the category of the tantras. So you have more, like the Om Krim Kalakaye Namaha, like the mantras that are about Kali, or the mantras that Om Namah Shivaya about Shiva. Those tend to be a little more related to deities, and that's where people often get worried. So my response to that is often, well, so if you think about these deities as archetypal energies, then it doesn't have to be such an offensive thing for you, or you just don't do it if it doesn't work for you. But why chant in Sanskrit? Because Sanskrit is a liturgical language that was developed to convey spiritual truths. English is a language for describing things beautifully and speaking, and commerce. And English tends to confine most of our sounds to the front of the mouth. If you notice, when next time you talk, you'll notice in English, you'll notice that the tongue is up at the front of the mouth a lot. Whereas with the liturgical languages, they use the other parts of the guttural sounds. Ha, ha, and they use more cerebral sounds that come to the top of the mouth. So it's quite different because you're making different sounds. And those sounds tend to be connected to energies subtle energies within the body. So Sanskrit was developed just like Latin, not just like Latin, but have some similarities with Latin, some similarities with indigenous languages, some similarities with ancient Chinese, some similarities with Hebrew, for example. Those ancient languages tend to have more they have more weight when it comes to the spiritual truths. So that's why we chant in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is the language, like all the sutras and all the texts are written in Sanskrit, even though some of that Sanskrit evolved over time. But you see some different Sanskrit, like in the first Veda compared to the Rig Veda compared to Atharva Veda, for example. The Sanskrits are slightly different pronunciation, and people around India will pronounce things differently too, even though Sanskrit is like technically supposed to always be the same, and it really isn't in practice. But anyway, so that's why we chant in Sanskrit. If you don't like Sanskrit, feel free to use an English prayer that makes more sense. If we're going to do a mantra for meditation, use something that makes more sense for you. So those are some of the things that I talk about with folks when they feel terrified or afraid that yoga is offending their belief system. Like, first of all, you're self-selecting, you're here, take some compassion with people, know that there's been a lot of trauma around religion for folks. Talk about how yoga comes from a system that is very, very neutral, but can be practiced within the context of any belief system. And what Sanskrit particularly we use because of its traditional relationship, and also because it conveys these spiritual truth. Now, I will say one more thing before I go, which is I want to talk about cultural appropriation, because there's the other side of it, right? So I'm not trying to just placate folks who have a more of a Western or Eurocentric religious perspective. I'm also trying to teach from an authentic tradition. And so sometimes there's a boundary that has to happen where you're like, okay, if this isn't for you, maybe you can find another, gym class that works better for you and not do yoga. Because there's, for as much as I want to be compassionate, I also want to be authentic. And sometimes the authenticity means that there are people that have not done enough processing, have not done enough personal work to get to the point where they're okay accepting other belief systems or learning from them. And I can't make everybody happy. I just can't, it's not that you never will. I think the quote goes, I don't know what the secret to success is, but the secret to failure is trying to make everybody happy. So that's a really important thing for me to remember too, is I want to teach authentically, and I do not want to be culturally appropriating. So I don't want to whitewash or water stuff down to make people happy. And so, we have to make choices sometimes, and sometimes it's just not the right fit for a person, and that is perfectly okay. So hope this has been helpful. I'd love to hear comments. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Take care.